All right, as promised, here he is, the great Ben Leber. Good to see you. Making this as real as possible, Ben. We've chatted on the phone a few times. Always love to bother you when I've got Vikings questions because you're as good as it gets. Your eyeballs are on that team day in, day out, and obviously, I think a lot of our listeners, readers remember you as a maybe an enemy. We've got a lot of Packer fans check out go along. So the memories might not always be good, but I can't wait to talk about your playing career, what you see in the Vikings for 2023. But first of all, how in the hell are you running around? Three kids, covering the Vikings. You do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tyler. Yeah, it's always good to kind of jump on and chat with you whenever we can about the Vikings and football and all this other stuff. And congrats to you on everything. And yeah, it's you and I were just kind of talking off camera before we started this. It's one of those things where I think when you have kids and for me starting a new career and all this other stuff, it's like you just go. You don't. I know that there's some intentional thought about things, and you do sort of like have a little bit of a plan, but so much of it is like, all right, we just gotta keep going forward. Like my wife and I, this is keep going forward. Like maybe we'll figure this out as we go. And I don't know. That's kind of how I feel like, maybe in a microcosm how my whole career has been, both as a player and now as a broadcaster. Um, I'm always trying to move forward. I know that there is a bigger goal in mind, but I try not to focus on that goal, and I really just try to like survive every day and just keep improving every day and just keep going forward and never stopping. I just don't want to stop. I get that anxiety and anxiousness when things are stagnant.
That's such a great way to put it, and that's really great that you've been able to maintain that pace like since you've been done playing. I mean, it's been I want to say 12
Oh my,
years since you
yeah,
retired,
yeah, it's
and
12 years.
that's the challenge for everybody. I was just talking to Kevin Cobb about this for that series we had, and like Darren College and Lee Smith, they all said the same thing. Like the trouble that guys have is you retire, right? You're living this quote unquote exaggerated lifestyle of the NFL. The highs are so high, the lows are so low, right? It's just not real life. I mean, at any given moment, somebody could take your job. In any given moment, you could make millions of dollars and be a hero. And it's you've got to ride that wave because if you don't ride that wave, then you're definitely done. But then the NFL's over and you're ejected into mainstream society, and you've got to find a way to either change it up completely and live a normal quote unquote life, or you stay in football somehow and lean into madness in other ways. It seems like you've been able to kind of just keep that survive and advance mentality with everything you do.
Yeah, and that's a buddy of mine and I were just talking about that the other day. We hear stories of people's paths and success, all over the place. I think we're always kind of inundated with people's stories, and we all love it. You have some stories where some guys are like, "Yeah, I was just kind of like dabbling in this, and at the same time, I was hustling here and doing this and over here." And one of their spokes just sort of works out where you get these other very successful people, whether they're athletes or business people, and they're like, you know what? I'm singular focused. I'm all in on the one thing. I have to be fully committed to that one thing. And I think it's more so that when you look at athletes, they have to be all in and committed to the thing to be successful. Now, I knew a lot of guys in the locker room too that had other side hustles and did other things, but I think by and large, I would say 80% of the guys in the locker room, and this is kind of the problem with transitioning out of the league or the military or whatever, is you're all in. You're fully committed to be successful at that one thing, because the way you laid it out, it's stressful. I mean, every day somebody's trying to take your job, and every day that unless you're performing at the highest of highs and getting a lot of return for the team, they're looking for ways to go cheaper. They're looking for ways to get rid of you, whether that's right or wrong. And so you feel that. So there's constant anxiety. You can barely hold on to the successes because the next day you got to go out and prove it again. It's what makes the NFL great, but at the same time, it can really sort of I wouldn't say wreck you when it comes to your emotions and your outlook and all that stuff, but it definitely makes it hard when you get done because you don't have that stress and anxiety. You don't have the time commitment. You know, the team keeps you on time. They set your schedule for you. You feel sort of lost in what you're supposed to do. You don't know what to commit yourself to. You know, a lot of guys will be like, "Oh yeah, I want to go, you know, now that I'm done playing, I not only want to golf, I also want to get involved in some businesses. I want to do some investing. I want to do this. I want to coach. I want to do like," and we think that we have all this time, but we forget that what makes us really good at our one job as a professional athlete was like we were all in on that one thing, you know, and
Yeah.
it's hard to kind of wrap your head around this new world.
I mean, shit, you do it from 5, 6 years old on, right? I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know about you. When did you get into football? I mean, really, I remember third grade putting the pads on, and until I realized, well, I should probably write about sports and talk about it as opposed to, getting run over at D3 level. I, transferred to Syracuse and did something else. But man, that's what makes it really hard. Is it's not like you get into the NFL and then the NFL career ends. It's your life, probably as far back as you can remember.
Yeah, well, you know, for me actually it was a little different. Growing up in South Dakota, we couldn't specialize. Like there's no way to specialize. You needed, you know, my high school was less than 500 kids. My graduating class was like 110, 115. Um, you had to have kids to play every sport. So every season we needed guys and girls to go out for sports. So it was football season, you're focused on football season. And I do think in that small time frame, you're right. We were it was all football. Like, you know, my kids now, I have my youngest son right now is in club soccer, club hockey, and travel baseball. All right now. You know, so it's it's different because it's baseball season here in Minnesota, but yet he's still doing hockey because it's hockey's year round around here in Minnesota. You know, he still loves to do other things, so he wanted to try the soccer thing. So that started last fall, but the season doesn't end until mid July. So it's like we're doing all these things, and he's not really singular focused on one thing. Um, but you know, with my upbringing, I was kind of fortunate. I think that I didn't start football until I was in seventh grade. I only did football just for the season of football. Got done with football, we went right into basketball, into track, into baseball. Um, so I didn't concentrate solely on football until I got to Kansas State, and I think in some ways that was good. In some ways it was I was underdeveloped. You know, I didn't understand the game as much as the other incoming freshmen. But I think because I didn't live it 24/7, I developed a hunger for it, and I think that hunger for it is really what set me apart. You know, as I went along in college because I didn't burn out at all.
It's a good point. I think you see that even with the best of the very best players in the NFL today. Patrick Mahomes, if there's a sport that exists, he probably played it and wanted to kick your ass in it. I mean, from golf to ping pong to basketball to baseball, and he almost like plays the position. It's like a warped combination of sports, the way he even quarterbacks, and you kind of see that with some of the very best. I think like there's got to be a science to it where if you play all these different sports, it's going to physically be good. You're using your body in these different angles, but mentally, like you said, you're not going to be burnt out by it. I think even like LeBron James to jump over to basketball, he's made that point with the AAU. I think like saying kids are, you can't hammer away with one sport round the clock because you're just going to get sick of it, and it's going to be a detriment.
Well, and I think everybody says all the right things. You know, I've certainly with my kids being, you know, 15, 12 and 9, we're kind of right in the middle of all this, you know, do you specialize, do you not? Um, and we've been to a lot of meetings with coaches at the start of seasons, and every coach says the same thing. Hey, look, we want multi-sport athletes. We encourage kids to play other sports. And then there comes the big but. But when it comes to this season, we expect full commitment X, Y, and Z. So I think across the nation, when it comes to the big AAUs and all the big the big organizations and corporations that run all these youth sports, they say all the right things, but they don't practice it. They do not practice it at all. because the second one league or one community, neighboring community or your rival, if they hear that you guys are like, letting your kids play other sports and the kids aren't super committed to basketball, well, then they just well, good. Here's our opening. We're just going to be uber committed to basketball, and we're going to kick their ass next season. So it just becomes this arms race with youth sports, and people talk a lot, but I have yet to see it in the years that I've gone through it. Any coach actually implement it, truly support it, and try to build a foundation of multi-sport athletes.
Gosh, I don't know if it compares, but the Norwegian way, Tony Gonzalez told me about. I didn't even hear about this. He mentioned. Do you ever hear about this on Real Sports? They did a special on like Norway to try to compete in the Winter Olympics. Like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, they implemented this like nationwide policy where kids up till whatever it is, age 13 maybe, like no scores are kept, no stats are kept. Like your parents aren't allowed to go crazy at games. If you do, you're kicked out. It's like they went above and beyond to just foster. These kids are playing for the love of a sport, and they're going to do a lot of sports. And eventually, and I want to say like it was subsidized with a gambling tax. I'm all over the place, but there are kind of wacky extreme measures, I guess, you could take, because I do think competition is good, right? It is good to instill, all right, at a young age, not everybody gets a trophy, but there's got to be some type of balance to not burning kids out.
Yeah, I don't know what that balance is. I really, I think that somehow, some way we do have to, even if the seasons are extended a little bit, take football. Football, I think football is unique because it's hard. It's really hard to, I think, specialize in football because what are you going to do? Put the pads on in the spring? No, you're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Like you might do some 7-on-7 stuff. You might do some running and lifting, but that's going to help you, as you cross over and do other sports. But again, like basketball, I just wish that if basketball in its sense went from, let's say, early October to, right before spring break, and then you're just done. Then if you want to pick up a couple like weekend camps or a couple day camps, fine here and there. But that's what we should be getting into, where we don't have these kids burning out. It's not hyper focused. They can go play lacrosse. They can go play baseball. They can go do other things and be fully committed. I do sort of worry, what are we raising these kids to do? It's like they might be good at a lot of things, but never great at one thing. I don't know. Like, I don't know how that's going to work where we're, playing all these different sports and then we're specializing in some sports and saying like, well, I don't know how you were, but when did you develop as an actual player? I mean, we're telling these kids at 10, 11, 12 years old, you're not good enough. Why? Because I'm just not mature enough yet. like, oh no, you're not good enough to make the team. And sorry, Billy, you got to go play for the house league. And you're crushing this kid's spirit to play a sport that they love because they're just maybe not developed yet. Then they get into high school and they might be legit. They grow into their bodies. I mean, I hit my growth spurt like probably going in for my freshman to sophomore year. Well, in this day and age, I would have been like cast out, early on, like I was too small to play.
It's crazy when you really think about it. You're right. Well, thankfully you weren't cast out because you played 10 years in the NFL, 143 games, the Chargers, the Vikings, the Rams. God, when you look back at your own career, I feel like when we hear from you, we're talking about the Vikings today, which is great because you're such a good analyst. But I mean, you were a hell of a player. I mean, you were on some really good teams. What's your best memory as a player?
Best memory as a player. God, right now, maybe just because it's so recent, but what all these rookies are going through right now. I remember so much of my rookie year from the pre-draft process to like the Senior Bowl. But my God, Tyler, the Senior Bowl was probably the most stressful time that I went through all that whole off season. Like,
really?
Probably not even as stressful as rookie mini camp with the Chargers, like or like all, which is crazy to think about what these guys are doing right now. the Senior Bowl was so damn intense. Um, you're just watched by everybody. I mean, you're doing a linebacker drill with running backs or tight ends, and you know you recognize all these head coaches and GMs, and they all just stand there with their arms folded, stoic. They don't say anything. They don't say anything more than like a whisper, and they just whisper to the guy next to them, which is probably some, one of their big scouts or something like that. And you can tell they're just talking crap on people. Um,
Yeah.
you get done with your drill, and you like kind of look over, and they're like whispering. You're like, what are they saying? Like, was it good? Was it bad? Was it like bad but not as bad as they thought? I don't know. It was just so much stress for the Senior Bowl. But I think my the draft process, the draft night, getting a phone call at 8 o'clock at night from the Chargers, thinking that it was the Vikings, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I thought it was the Minnesota Vikings calling because they were on the clock. And
Yeah.
you don't really know how it works, but it's the team behind them that's making the phone call, and not the team on the clock. So, just mixed emotions there, and then going to San Diego and immediately meeting Junior Seau. It was like there was so much. I felt like my whole first year was like a dream, like with everything, the season, the practices, just meeting everybody, a whole new life with my, now wife, but fiance at the time, going to San Diego as two young, stupid kids, not knowing anything, never been to California before, didn't know how to look for houses, didn't know where to live. Like it was everything. I mean, everything was just, it was bananas, like the whole year.
God, Junior Seau. I mean, what a teammate to have right out of the chute as a linebacker. What was he really like? For people who would love to know it, just this legend was like up
It's,
close day in and day out.
yeah, everybody that meets him, um, you're immediately sort of pulled into his world. Like you're pulled into his energy. And it sounds so crazy to think about. I'm sure that people, maybe this is you yourself. Like just there's a magnetism to his whole being. He'd walk
Yeah.
into the locker room, and he was just, everybody would just watch him, and watch his every move, and everything that he said, people were just like hanging on. And there was an intensity, but there was like this really boyish, like fun-loving spirit that he loved the game. That's one of the things that I learned from Junior was, all these professional players will say, "Man, I miss the games, and I miss Sundays, or I miss game day, whatever sport they're playing." And for me, what I learned from him was, um, he loved practice. If he was faking it, he did a great job. But he loved waking up in the morning, going to the weight room, hitting the weights, getting a sweat on. He was always the one guy in the weight room that's crushing everything. He could run for days, he could lift whatever. He was like a superhero, and he'd attack meetings with the same intensity. He's watching the minute things, like where am I working, where do I go on this play, what am I doing? Like he was always thinking about the game, and it got me to really enjoy the process of the week. And you enjoy game days because of all the pomp and circumstance and all the other stuff. But I learned that from Junior, like you got to attack the game, in the 6 days leading up to the game, and you can't take a day off. And every practice is important, and every rep is important, and it can be fun. I mean, he had tons of fun doing what he was doing. Always a smile on his face. Always calling everybody buddy. Everybody was his best friend. Yeah, he was a special human being.
R.I.P. I mean, it's crazy. It's been a while since he passed, and that was one that I think stunned this generation of football fans because you read League of Denial. There's a lot of names like Mike Webster. That's the '70s. Guys going through stuff. And here's a player we all grew up on, Junior Seau. Like we're watching him every Sunday. The fact that he went through his CTE, his head trauma. I don't know if you kept in touch with him when he was done playing. Like, did were you guys close when he was maybe going through some of his harder times at the end?
We were close for a couple years. We only played together 1 year, and then he went off to Miami. But
Right.
San Diego was his home, so he would come back every offseason. So I trained with he and John Lynch and a group of other kids. And I say kids, that was the crazy thing. Like, you think that Junior lived this sort of exclusive lifestyle, but he worked out with this gal that ran this Egoscue clinic in La Jolla, and when we would work out in the mornings, it was me and Justin Peel, who's now the tight ends coach for the Falcons. Justin and
Yeah.
I, and then Junior and John Lynch, we would work out, let's say at 7 in the morning, and there'd be 10, 15 other kids, they're high school kids, that work out with us. It was just like a group fitness class. It wasn't like this exclusive deal, and they loved it, and they loved being around Junior, and I believe all of us, just to like compare yourself to what professional athletes are doing. But we were close in that sense. I did a lot of stuff for his charity. Hung out with him a little bit in the off season, but he's a super busy guy. And then once the season would start, we'd kind of lose contact again. And then we had a lot of close. I was really good friends with a lot of his close friends. So when he eventually retired, I was staying in touch with his buddies more than I was Junior. And I heard everything. I kind of knew what was going on, and guys tried to help him, guys tried to reach out to him. Unfortunately, I think it was a longer road than people realize. I think that there was an internal struggle going on much longer than people realize. And a lot of people tried to help, but when you're in that mental state, sometimes you just don't want to be helped, or there's denial, or whatever it is. But he certainly did not take the advice, I think, from the people around him that loved him, to get some help.
Man, just got to reach out, right? I mean, that's what you got to
Yeah.
do. It's always the other stuff, the darker side effects of a concussion, what you're going through. But back to you, Ben. Like, you're got in Minnesota, that 09 season. I mean, that was a team that I'm gonna tell you probably should have won the Super Bowl if you're not. If you're not, I can say this because Monis isn't here. He was on the personnel staff for the Saints, so we can rip on the Saints. But you guys were screwed. So many plays I forgot about in that game. Even in overtime alone, there were like 3 or 4 terrible calls up to the pass interference on you, which wasn't even close. But that was a team, let alone the Bountygate stuff, the fact that they're trying to take Brett out. That was a team that, God, that must have felt like a special group that was going to do some special things when you're right in the middle of it, like you were.
Yeah, I was preparing myself for this type of question, because you're daggering me right now, and it's early in the morning, and I don't need to relive this pain and horror that was.
We softened you up. We softened you up on talking about kids sports, and then we wait till 23 minutes, and then we go in for the kill.
Yeah. It's a good plan. I like that approach. Yeah, man. 2009 was awesome. Starting with Brett Favre, and he had that like Junior Seau sort of feel, mystique to him. One of the few guys I've been around that when he walked in the locker room, like, oh yeah, this is exactly what Junior had. He has that magnetism, and it was such a fun season because we knew that we were. Every defense that I was on with the Vikings, we were good. We were good, if not great. We statistically, I think a couple years we were number 1 ranked defense, certainly number 1 ranked run defense. We really prided ourselves on nobody running against us with the Williams wall, and EJ and Chad and I playing linebacker, and we really thought our front 7 was the best in the league, and we tried to prove it by stopping the run. And so we knew that our defense was sound. It was solid. It was good enough. We had some warts like everybody does, but we just knew that if we just had a dynamic, passer, we could do something. And Brett comes on, and everybody goes crazy. And the Greg Lewis Hail Mary against the 49ers, back right corner of the end zone, solidified everything that we saw in practice, and everything that we saw early in that season was like, this guy's legit. this guy is what is our missing piece. He's going to bring the swagger to every one of our games, and we're going to come out of this tunnel with, more confidence than we had. And that's what happened. I mean, I've never been a part of a season or a team. We walked out of the tunnel and we said, how much are we going to win by? Like, we know we're going to win. We know that we're the better team. How are we going to win? And what's the score going to look like? That's the type of confidence that we had. And then you go into that awful championship game. It was such a fun atmosphere. New Orleans knows how to throw a party. That stadium is one of the loudest, most fun stadiums to play in. But look, we had them on the ropes. You take away even half the turnovers that we had, the game's not even close. We were the better team, and that's, I think, what hurts the most is we were the better team. We clearly didn't execute. They out-executed us, which is what the name of the game is. But talent-wise, we were the better team. And, I had buddies tell us afterwards, Scott Shanling and Scott Fajita, they would tell me after they won the Super Bowl, they're like, yeah, you guys would have killed the Colts. And like, we know, they're like, that championship game really was our Super Bowl. At the end of the day, at the end of the season, when they reflect on it, they're like, the Colts game was an easy game for them. They're like, the battle that we had in the Superdome, that was our Super Bowl. And it's nice and refreshing to hear, but it also hurts, that, man, we were that close. We were so close to the magical season paying off. And, that's just the way it goes. That's the way football goes, man.
Yeah. I think that even Packer fans have an appreciation for Brett Favre's mindset that season. I mean, to go out there and really want to stick it to the whole league, I guess, but to Green Bay, like, you don't want me anymore. And he was perfect those two games. I mean, it was unbelievable how he was dialed in to watch that game from afar. I mean, it was like AI out there just doing whatever he wanted. And then even maybe the championship game, I know he had the boneheaded, turnover, which we all remember. I'm sure you remember, but like, about as impressive of a game out of a quarterback in terms of just taking a beating.
Mm-hmm.
And now we know why, obviously, but the hits he took that game, and modern football, that's about as violent as it gets. And he just kept getting up.
He kept getting up. He was a true warrior in every sense of the word. And during the game, we never suspected that there's anything else going on, anything as far as like a bounty or something like that. And I gotta be honest. I know a lot of Viking fans aren't going to want to hear this, and I know that there was an investigation, but I've talked to several of the Saints players, and they're like, look, we had incentives like everybody does. Like, we have incentives all the time of like, hey, first guy on kickoff to get a tackle inside the 10, a veteran will be like, I'll give you $500. That stuff happens a lot. They said that they did the same thing. They never put a bounty on trying to hurt Brett Favre. There was an emphasis, as you do with every quarterback, to make your hits count. And were some of them, I think, illegal? Absolutely, and they should have been called. They weren't. I think I was more disappointed by the referees and the poor refereeing in that game, where you're high-low a quarterback, and whether the timing is there or not, like, that's a roughing the passer. Even back then, that was roughing the passer. You can't high-low a quarterback like that in a throwing motion. So there are just I don't necessarily think that there was specific bounties to take out Brett. We talked about the same thing in our locker room, as far as in our meetings, as far as getting after Drew Brees. We say it with every quarterback, especially in a playoff game. We're like, look, no quarterback wants to be hit, and no quarterback wants to be running for his life. So we have to harass the quarterback. Now, if you say, hey, you gotta kill the head of the snake, okay, you're making like tough guy words, but it's the same thing. The same message is getting across to the defensive players, that get after the quarterback, kick his ass, make him feel us, and hopefully he throws an interception to us and we get a couple turnovers because we're playing more aggressive than they are.
Isn't that the truth, though? I mean, we all heard Greg Williams's pregame speech, and if we're sitting, here in an office with a coffee and, it's climate controlled and, We got our warm. Yeah, it's gonna sound pretty nasty, pretty gnarly, but within the context of a locker room, a lot of shit gets said. It's a different world. It's its own little ecosystem, and I'm sure opponents probably really didn't bat an eye when you cut the head off the snake and the body will die. I mean, a little specific on that little guy with the ACL. Maybe you don't talk about ACLs, Greg, but the overall message probably. And Greg's a interesting character. He's different. He's always been that way. But that's on brand for an NFL locker room, I think. When you heard that, were you like, oh my God? Or were you like, yeah, that's kind of how it is?
Well, I think part of it was like I understood his reputation before I even heard all that stuff. Like I knew,
Yeah.
again, we all have friends that play on other teams and we all hear other things. And he's a super intense, old school type of guy. He's going to get in your face. He's not going to care about which four-letter word he's going to spit in your face. He's going to find any way that he can to motivate you. And that in a sense, that's kind of how I was raised. That's kind of how the coaches were at K-State, for better or worse. It's like they're trying to get the best out of a bunch of guys that were 1 and 2 star players, and we got to go out and compete against Texas and Oklahoma. And we're trying to get these guys to hit the gas and hit the accelerator on their development. Look, that when I heard that, I'm like, what's the big freaking deal? Like, I don't. Yeah, you don't target somebody's actual injury, but you don't. But the public doesn't think that we're aware of guys that are playing hurt. Like, we know there's an injury report for a reason, mostly because of betting. But when we see an injury report and you're like, hey, Drew Brees has a bum shoulder, you don't think that we're going to somehow try to get hits on the shoulder like that? It just kind of goes without saying. Like, you don't go into the game like, well, that's not very PC, you guys. Like, boy, if this ever gets out there, public is not going to like that. Screw that, man. We got 16 games to go out and prove ourselves and try to win a championship. If a guy gets hurt in a violent game, sorry, that's just the way the game is played. Obviously done with between the whistles, and then it's all legal. But if you can take a hit on a guy, take a hit.
Kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier. I mean, this game, the lifestyle, you better be going 100 miles an hour. Like, you've got to keep up. I mean, this is the most violent game on earth. The pressure is as high as it gets. You can't just kind of tiptoe into the deep end. You need
No.
to dive headfirst in and kick ass. And I guess that's what pisses me off when the NFL is trying to find this middle ground that doesn't really exist with the flags and the fines and selling the game as safe. It just seems dishonest because the world you describe, that's just what it is, right? I mean, as long as there's blocking and tackling, you have to play fast and hit fast to survive.
Yeah, and that's what, and that's what the fans want.
Yeah, yeah. Nobody wants flag football.
No, I mean, even the fans can't have it both ways. The fans can't be out there when their star player gets hurt. Now, again, all of this is legal, like you're saying, like, a legal hit, guy gets hurt. It might be, it might be violent, it might be forceful, it might be a guy going across the middle, gets his bell rung. You can't be mad about that when your player gets hurt, but then when you turn around and Harrison Smith hits the guy and he gets a flag, and you're like, well, wait a minute, like, that's a legal hit. Like, you can't protect players on one side and not the other and have it benefit you. The intimidation of the game has been taken out. The NFL is the best sport in America because there's a controlled sense of violence, and I think that the NFL is trying to control that even more. It's taken away from the game. I mean, I love the game, and there's even games where, like, I find this unwatchable. There's a flag on every play. I can understand why people are turning out sometimes and going to a different sport, because they're like, there's no action. Like, we don't understand the rules. It's too complicated. What does that even mean? Like, what's an illegal low block outside of the tackle box within this area? That's like, wait. I mean, I think they got to refine the rules, clean them up a little bit, make it more consistent, increase the flow of the game, and put out a better product that's kind of what we grew up watching. And if you have to make these contracts a little bit more on the guaranteed for a year or two, then fine. But there's got to be some sort of compromise.
Damn, perfectly said, Ben. I couldn't agree more. It's like the more bureaucracy, the more regulation, like anything in life, the more confused and pissed off everybody's going to be. And emphasis on confusion, right to the Super Bowl, right to the game where millions of people around the world are watching the product, and it's decided on a very, very questionable call. It's just, I know you got to
Yeah.
run, but before we lose you, Ben, we got to get your thoughts quick. Today's Vikings, interesting team. I mean, we talked this time last year a lot about culture. The culture's set now. Mike Zimmer's out. Kevin O'Connell in, number one in the NFLPA survey for every best possible reason you could want to play for the Vikings. I mean, you're talking to these guys too. They're happy to go to work in the morning, and that alone, yeah. I mean, the building has been cleansed, fumigated, the asbestos has been removed. They're in a good place now. They've had to make some tough choices this year. Some good players like Eric Hendricks aren't going to be there. Harrison Smith, who you referenced, he's sticking around at 34, which is good. Big decision at quarterback kind of looms, but Kirk Cousins is the guy for now. They're off a division title, but are fans kind of jacked up about this team as a contender in 2023? Or is it kind of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out? We still kind of have to think about the future. I can't really get a sense for where the team is at right now, because we should be talking about them as a contender when you look at their record last year and second year with this regime. What does Ben Leber state of the Vikings?
I don't think contender really is in the conversation right now. I think there's a lot of optimism. The offense should be, more than a top 10 offense. I think Kirk is going to have another huge year. He's set himself. It's another prove it deal in which he's very accustomed to, and it's not going to bother him. And I trust him. I do trust the fact that he's going to compartmentalize that and put that off to the side and just go out there and do the best job that he can to help this team win a Super Bowl. He's going to have a lot of weapons on offense, whether Dalvin Cook's there or not. I think the reason why there's apprehension is because we've seen what this defense has looked like the last 2 years. Actually, the last 3 years. The last two with Mike Zimmer and this last year. The defense has been the liability. And it's been the inability to control the game defensively. We can't stop the run consistently. Too many third down conversions. Teams march down the field. And we have these high-scoring affairs because the defense just can't hold its water. So I think the biggest acquisition this whole offseason was Brian Flores. I do think that his presence, philosophy, and way that he approaches the game without changing personnel. I mean, if we had the same team from last year, which finished the bottom of the league when it comes to total defense, if we have the same guys from last year, I think his presence and his philosophy and his ability to disguise and all this other stuff, I think that this defense is in the high 20s, like maybe 25 as far as ranking. I think he's that much better. Now, we've jettisoned some guys. Kendricks is gone. I understand all that. Patrick Peterson, I just don't think that he was going to fit this scheme. This is going to be more of a man cover situation. So I do think that we got a little bit better there on the outside, only because he wasn't going to fit what they were trying to do. And he was going to be a liability, I think, this upcoming season. So some big names are gone. But, I really think that if this defense can be somewhere in the 14, 15, 16 ranking, especially in points, yeah, we got a contending team. But because the last 3 years we haven't proven it, I think there is apprehension that, all right, guys, we know our offense can score. And we saw what happened last year where we had to have a lot of things go our way to win those games. I think this is going to be a competitive team. I think this is a playoff team, but unless we show some physicality on defense and unless we show a real balance on offense to run the ball when we need to, this might be, this could be another disappointing season in the fact that we might make the playoffs and be bounced again like we were last year with the Giants.
I know it. it's hard to look at the names of the players, the personnel, and I mean, maybe Brian Flores can work that magic, wave a magic wand, and they are better. But I don't. I think I'm a hopeless romantic. I like the fact that they lose all these one-score games under Zimmer. They win them on O'Connell. You can look at that from an analytics point of view and think that's luck. They're the luckiest team. They're frauds. I think that there's a reason you're winning these one-score games. There's something to the mentality of a player late in the fourth quarter to make a play. I don't know how you quantify it, but I think something changed there for the good with this team.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. You can feel it in the building when you walk in, and the guys were talking about it last year when O'Connell came in and Kwesi came in. I think that's going to happen with every new regime change. It's like, okay, there's a refresh, there's a vibrancy in the air, there's a different energy. I think that's true across the board. But that when that honeymoon phase is over, that carried through.
Yeah.
That carried through to the start of the season, that carried through all the way through the season, because I think there's a consistency of voice with the way Kevin and Kwesi approach their everyday. And so guys knew exactly what type of personality they were going to get. And I think that helped them thrive. Like they very quickly, they changed the culture of that locker room. And that's a hard thing to do in one season. And that's why I think there is optimism. It's just, it's not so much the apprehensions on offense, because we've seen what Kevin can do. We've seen the matchups that he can find. We've seen the way that he can get the ball in people's hands in certain situations and ask guys to step up, like KJ Osborne so many times last year. It's like, man, here's a play where we got to have it, and JJ's getting bracketed, and Thielen's doing something over here, and Osborne goes out and has a great game and a great series of catches that really helps us win the game. They bring on Hawkinson, and all of a sudden now we've got a true threat in the middle of the field, and we've got a lot of weapons. Like no doubt, this offense is going to be good enough to win a Super Bowl. It's just whether or not this defense can pick it up and pick up the pieces. Figure out what this new defense looks like, and get up to speed as fast as the offense did last year.
I could pick your brain for hours, but you've got things to do. I don't know how you balance it all. I want to ask you a million questions in that department, but maybe we'll have you back on, because
we can do this.
It's impressive. Ben, you're the man. Thank you so much for hanging out, and let's catch up again here soon.
Yeah, no problem, man. Always a pleasure, and let's keep in touch, and maybe we'll do this again. We'll do part 2 some other time.
Hell yeah, sounds like a plan.
All right, thanks, Tyler.